Our topic for this quarter is Christian attitudes. I suppose I need to thank Cleo for asking me to teach this class. You may want to blame him later when the class is over. But our series this quarter is on Christian attitudes. And I may not be sharing anything that's brand new or earth-shattering that you may not have heard, but more than likely it will be age-old truths that all of us need to consider as we face each and every new day. So our lesson this evening I've entitled, Why Do We Do the Things That We Do? And this is going to be the first class. Each class will be not a continuation, except they'll all be about certain Christian attitudes or attitudes toward certain things. Next week, Roger McDonald will be teaching as I'll be out of town. And then in a couple of weeks from tonight, we'll have a class on forgiveness. Now, I want you to pay particular attention to that class because you may need to learn to forgive Cleo for inviting me to teach this class. Anyway, forgiveness is one of our lessons here in a couple of weeks. And then other classes that we have after I believe we're going to have devotionals December the 23rd and the 30th around Christmas time. But we'll start classes back in January. And other classes that we will have will be on topics such as gratitude, hope, materialism. Maybe we should have that class before Christmas, maybe, I don't know. But other classes on courage to be strong, topic of fault finding, prayer, and something I know that we don't need any help is, and that's on controlling our temper, or being of good temper and anger. So my first question is, why are you here tonight? Well, for many of us, it's become a habit, right? And a good habit. They say on average, if you do something 66 times, it becomes a habit, right? Or for 66 days, it becomes automatic. And then before you know it, it's 66 weeks, 66 months. And for some of us now, 66 years. So for several decades, many of us have been attending Bible classes and Bible study on Wednesday nights, and it's a habit. It's a good habit. And certainly we've become accustomed to it, and hopefully that we will never take it for granted. We appreciate, especially during times like these, that our elders have decided for us to continue to meet here on Wednesday nights, as others may not be meeting. And we're grateful for those that are able to tune in via live streaming tonight. And we're glad that you're able to be with us in spirit virtually. But hopefully we will never take it for granted. And we are grateful that our elders have provided Bible classes not just for adults, but also for our children. And hopefully soon even more classes for children will be available, as well as hopefully the Bible Builders on Sunday nights, which is really a precious time for our youngsters during the evening worship on Sunday nights. But for some, coming to worship on Wednesday nights may not yet be a habit. And while we hope that it will be a habit, I'm reminded of the real reason why we're here tonight, as the scripture gives us in Hebrews 10:24 and 25, a verse that just last Wednesday night that was shared with us and Bryce talked about in our devotional last Wednesday night. And let us consider how to stir up one another to love and good works, not neglecting to meet together, as is the habit of some, but encouraging one another, and all the more as you see the day drawing near. So hopefully, aside from it being a good habit, we're all here to encourage one another, to be encouraged. The singing, thank you, Bryce, for leading us. Thank you, Daniel, for the prayer, for our study together and the fellowship and the common bond on our journey together. Why? Because we have the desire to be here and to learn and to grow. And it's really refreshing. Many of you tend to linger around after worship is over, after Bible study is over, and that's some of the precious times that we have together, is to share with each other about what's going on with our lives. It's a very sweet fellowship, and some of you, I know, we almost have to kick you out of the building and turn the lights off so Larry can go home. But we're glad that you have this opportunity to be together here tonight. It's been said that everything can be taken from a man or a woman except for one thing, and that to choose one's attitude in any given set of circumstances, or to choose one's way. I want to thank Ken for his Sunday morning sermon. If you were here, you heard another great lesson. But he talked about making choices. And we'll be talking more about that later tonight, as well as in the weeks to come, the choices that we make. So a question: is our attitude a choice? It certainly is. Now, some of us maybe not have come to that realization yet. Some of us most often take the mood that the events of the day hand us, and we act correspondingly. We react a lot instead of always being in control of our attitude. If someone mentions some bad news, or maybe about politics, or maybe about COVID, or maybe your team that's having a bad season or something, that kind of puts us in a foul mood. If I were to come home from playing golf, Beth usually can kind of tell what kind of round I played by my attitude, when I come home from playing. And I've been working on it a lot this week because I haven't played golf one time this week. So I'm really working on my attitude this week about not playing golf. But if you get a promotion, something really good happens at work, or you get a raise, man, it's a on top of the world kind of day, isn't it? But do you get to choose your attitude? Most certainly. Let's talk about what Webster says, how Webster defines an attitude. Webster defines attitude as a mental position with regard to a fact or state, a feeling or emotion toward a fact or state, a state of readiness to respond in a characteristic way to a stimulus, an object, concept, or situation. So now that we know how Webster defines what an attitude is, what can we do about our attitude? So I want to look at several simple ideas that's suggested by the one who was described by a man after God's own heart. Acts 13:22 says, I have found in David, the son of Jesse, a man after my heart, who will do all my will. So here are some suggestions from the psalmist David. Psalms 34, verse 3. Oh, magnify the Lord with me, and let us exalt his name together. When we take the time to acknowledge and to realize how much greater God is than the problems that we may be facing, the issues that are on our mind, we certainly will be encouraged when we consider how much greater God is. Life won't seem to be so dismal to the one who is a child of the all-powerful, all-knowing God. Just last week, Beth and I were driving around, and we're coming up on I-45 in Conroe, and we looked up. Some of you remember the beautiful rainbow. I believe it was Tuesday of last week. And we were listening to something on the radio, and it was the usual thing about politics. But we were reminded of God's promise, the reminder to Noah and to us that he will never destroy the earth with water. And so that beautiful rainbow, that God is with us, that he is in control, and that all is well. We can stop, we can pause, and we can praise God and exalt his holy name. Certainly that can lift our attitudes up and improve our attitude immeasurably. It brought us back. It changed our minds of what we were thinking about. It altered the path that we were thinking about when we were thinking about things that were mentioned on the radio. And it helped to improve our attitude. Second thing we can do is that we can be thankful. David gave this admonition in Psalm 103 and verse 2, "Bless the Lord, O my soul, and forget not all his benefits." And after writing that, he listed some of his many blessings. Don't you think the same would work for us? When we are thankful and we count our blessings, we remember that God has not forgotten us. Every day, his mercies toward us are rich. This may have been the scene last Thursday at where you were enjoying Thanksgiving. So I don't know if you can see the descriptions on some of the things that were being served there, such as faith, love, peace, prosperity, hope, health, forgiveness, protection. Sometimes the blessings are right in front of us, and yet we don't see them, as this cartoon, suggests. So what else can we do about our attitude? David wrote in Psalms 101 verse 3, "I will not set before my eyes anything that is worthless. I hate the work of those who fall away. It shall not cling to me." We know that much of what we may hear on the radio or see on TV or some of the emails that come across our computer can fill our minds with ideas that can certainly be discouraging. Seems more of that so late, doesn't it? Problems that worry us, the social media contributes to that, don't they? Unwholesome ideas and images. We are bombarded, every day. So what can we do about that? We need to break out the blinders. Now, when I think about blinders, maybe you like I think about the horse in a horse race that has those blinders so he can focus just only what's right in front of him, not looking to the right or not looking to the left. Maybe we need blinders at times. Now, I don't know if you can buy blinders like these on Amazon or maybe down at the local technology store. I don't know. If you do, maybe we should all buy some sometime, right? Maybe it will help us to focus on really what God wants us to focus on, what's in front of us, and not the things that are of the world, as Ken, so capably remind us of. When I think about thinking of things of the world and things about that we need blinders for, I'm reminded of Philippians chapter 4, verses 4 through 8. "Rejoice in the Lord always, and again I say rejoice. Let your reasonableness be known to everyone. The Lord is at hand. Do not be anxious about anything, But in everything by prayer and supplication with thanksgivings, let your requests be made known to God. And the peace of God, which surpasses all understanding, will guard your hearts and your minds in Christ Jesus. Finally, brothers, whatever is true, whatever is honorable, whatever is just, whatever is pure, whatever is lovely, whatever is commendable, if there is any excellence, if there is anything worthy of praise, think about these things. Some of you may remember the phrase, garbage in, garbage out. Any of you recall what that first referred to? Kay says computers. You know something about computers. You taught about computers a lot. Yes, garbage in, garbage out was first, I think, applied to computers. But it also explains many a poor and unwholesome attitude. We as Christians certainly should demonstrate attitudes that are markedly different than those of the world. Jesus said so in John 15:11. These things I have spoken to you, that my joy may be in you, and that your joy may be full. Question for ourselves tonight, or for yourself. Is your joy full? Maybe ask someone that's close to you, does my joy show? If it doesn't, isn't it time maybe to choose a better attitude with God's help? Now, when I think of the word joy, I think of the acronym JOY, Jesus first, others second, yourself last. Also, when I think of the word joy, I'm going to date myself when I say this, but I remember back in the late 70s and early 80s, there was a talk show in the afternoon on AM radio that was hosted by former state senator Mike Richards. Anyone remember that show, the Mike Richards? Some of us that have been around for a while remember that. But one thing I remember about that show, he always ended the show by saying, don't let anyone steal your joy. Remember that? Boy, that just kind of gave me a good, as I was driving wherever I was going in the afternoon, listening to that talk show in the afternoon, don't let anyone steal your joy. Certainly we can think about that and be reminded that we sometimes need to change our attitude. So when we ask ourselves the question, why do we do the things that we do? Let's get right to the heart of the matter. Number one, the free moral agency of man. So what sets man apart from animals is the ability to reason and to decide. Animals behave on an instinctive level, and they have a limited ability to learn from cause and effect. While we may shoot or kill certain animals because death or destruction, we don't punish them as morally accountable creatures, do we? A shark may attack or a crocodile may kill because it's been programmed to do so. It is his nature of that particular animal. Humans, on the other side, we're created differently. We have been endowed with the power of choice. So while there are many instinctive actions in our makeup, maybe like a baby wanting to be fed, our need for love and acceptance, food, water, etc. But the fabric of our lives is woven largely in the individual choices and decisions that we make. We choose to come, we choose to go, we choose to love or hate or like or dislike. We choose to learn. We choose to remain ignorant. We choose to marry. We choose not to marry. We choose to help. We choose not to help or hurt others. But the freedom to act, with this freedom that we have to act and make our own choice, comes with a frightful consequence. Our Maker has declared that he will hold us accountable for what we decide and the path that we choose. We recognize and affirm this idea when we declare a man guilty of violating the law and punish him. Justice says, in effect, you have behaved wrongly and you should have done differently. Do we find concepts like fate or karma in the Bible? No. These are not biblical concepts. Man has created, such ideas or doctrines to maybe relieve or ease the terrible guilt feelings that are resulted by knowing that a man has not lived as man knows that he should. So when we choose to act, it's vital that we choose wisely. So we've talked about things that we can do about our attitude, but what is it that really affects our choices? When we make our choice to do this or to do that, there's a number of things that influence our decisions every day, right? And we may not always be aware of these forces, but we've been shaped and conditioned by them in powerful ways, over the years. When you think about what affects our choices, we might not think about genetics. A technical knowledge of genetics has confirmed that, for an example, some children are born with temperaments and tendencies of their parents already in place. Some are more headstrong, others are compliant. Some have a short fuse, others are passive, some are optimistic, others are anxious and fretful. What about the nurturing that parents give their children? How does that affect our choices? Well, this is probably a very significant bearing as we deliberate choices. Parents' values, good and bad, certainly will greatly influence the choices that we make. I, as I imagine you, are especially thankful for the upbringing and the values that your parents have had for you in your growing up years. Your grandparents, your spouse, their grandparents, the influence that they've had on you. And so we should certainly probably also mention siblings, as I've seen how siblings can greatly influence children, particularly on their actions. We see that a lot in our grandkids, it seems like. What about peer groups, peer pressure? Ken talked a lot about that. He said if everybody else is doing it, probably it's not a good thing, probably isn't right. There's a tremendous amount of pressure, particularly with young people, to fit in and to be liked. What about our own self-interest when it comes to making decisions that we do? Is at first, it's a survival instinct. Ever know a baby who doesn't cry when they're uncomfortable? But as life progresses, such self-interest can turn from survival to self-indulgent pleasure. We may make choices simply because we like the outcome, regardless of the consequences or the impact upon others. Remember the phrase, if it feels good, do it, or whatever makes you happy, right? How many times do expressions like that and that kind of a self-interest thinking affect the choices that we make? So all of these attitudes swirl around in our minds and are gradually forged into a mindset or a set of attitudes that define us as a person. Now, we may camouflage our true selves by speaking or acting in a way different from our real attitudes, thus deceiving others and perhaps deceiving ourselves. But our real identity is revealed more often than we know, and it's always seen by God. When we think about why do we do the things that we do, we need to think about discovering our own attitudes. Have you ever been told, or has someone ever told you that you need an attitude adjustment? I can remember very well the first time that this happened to me as I was a college student. I had an unusual summer job. I was selling books and Bibles door to door in summer of '73 in Dalton, Georgia. And, it was pretty discouraging at times, but I learned to grow up. That was one of the purposes of the company that I worked for at that time, the Southwestern Publishing Company, was to put good books in people's homes and also help college kids grow up. And it helped me grow up a great amount. And I didn't learn as much the first year, so I went back and did it 3 more summers after that in Kentucky and Arkansas, and the last year in eastern Tennessee. But a lot of good experiences, and some people called it the University of Hard Knocks. Knocking on 40, 50 doors a day. But my goal was to put good books in people's homes and help put a smile on their face and make a difference in their life. Now, that was my goal each day. Long hours, but very, very beneficial. But one afternoon, while I was knocking doors in a neighborhood that was particularly older people, I suppose like myself now, older people, someone noticed that I was going from door to door, and they got a little nervous, and they called the police. And so I had my first trip ever in the back of a police car down to the chief of police office. And that was an interesting experience for a young college student. And I never forget this chief of police looking me right in the eye and saying, "Son, I don't appreciate your attitude one bit." Wow. Boy, you talk about making me want to crawl in a hole and forget I was there. Boy, he really did a number on me. I probably wasn't showing as much humility as I should have demonstrated because I knew I wasn't doing anything wrong. I was just doing my job and helping people to put good books in their home. Anyway, that was a real eye-opening experience. But, in reality, don't we need to be constantly adjusting our attitudes to conform to the standards that God has for us? And since these classes this quarter on Wednesday night are dealing with the Christian's attitude, I assume you already acknowledge the value of God's approval. We who believe in God fundamentally agree that God's standards for us are valid and superior. So one of our first problems that we encounter is identifying what our real attitudes are. And this requires 2 basic qualities: self-awareness and honesty. First, we must learn to study and evaluate ourselves. Now, some of you may say, my spouse is pretty good at evaluating, our attitudes about certain things, right? So what do I think, and why do I think it? What are my basic desires? Why do I favor option A over option B? Or why do I choose this instead of that choice? What is my real motive? And many times, these are uncomfortable questions that we need to ask ourselves because sometimes the answers may not be so flattering, right? Sometimes we may think more highly of ourselves than we should and hesitate to really give an honest answer, which may be uncomfortable. Secondly, unless we're honest with ourselves, we may plow through this life with thoughts and attitudes that God finds not acceptable or wrong, even as we attend worship, read our Bibles, pray, speak religious lingo. The most reliable way to study ourselves and discern our true attitudes is to compare ourselves with the revelation of God. God, as our maker, knows his human product better than we know ourselves. He knows what makes us tick. He knows our emotions, mentally, physically, spiritually. And the scriptures reveal our true inner self. We read in Hebrews chapter 4, verses 12 and 13, "For the word of God is living and active, sharper than any two-edged sword, piercing to the division of soul and of spirit, of joints and of marrow, and discerning the thoughts and intentions of the heart. And no creature is hidden from his sight, but all are naked and exposed to the eyes of him to whom we must give an account." The written word is key to understanding ourselves. Also, James chapter 1, verses 21 to 25. "Therefore put away all filthiness and rampant wickedness, and receive with meekness the implanted word, which is able to save your souls. But be doers of the word, and not hearers only, deceiving yourselves. For if anyone is a hearer of the word, and not a doer, he is like a man who looks intently at his natural face in a mirror. He looks at himself and goes away and at once forget what he was like. But the one who looks into the perfect law, the law of liberty, and perseveres, being no hearer who forgets, but a doer who acts, he will be blessed in his doing." So James here connects the importance of hearing the word and then doing and conforming to it. This is like looking into a mirror and then promptly forgetting our appearance. Now, some of us would like to do that, right? But likewise, if we look into a mirror, the perfect law of liberty, we will see our inner self, flaws and all. We can then make adjustments, maybe like we do with our hair, our clothing. But to change our inward self, it's not an easy thing to do. But this is a way by which the implanted word is able to save our souls. When I think about discovering our own attitudes, I ran across a story the other day about a man named Jerry. Now, Jerry was one of these kind of guys that was always happy, always positive. You know, the type that never seems to be down. You say, "Jerry, how you doing?" He'd say, "Man, if I were any better, I'd be twins." You may have heard people say that. Well, Jerry was a manager of a restaurant, and others would shadow him and go around and watch him. And he said, "Jerry, you're amazing. Why are you always happy?" He said, "Well, I just make that choice. Whatever happens in life, I'm always going to be happy." Well, one day Jerry did something that, as a restaurant manager, you don't do. He left the back door open. And robbers came in and held him up at gunpoint, and his hands were shaking as he was trying to remember the combination to the safe. And they shot him, and the robbers took off. Well, fortunately, someone found Jerry, and as he was being wheeled into the emergency room, the medical professionals were looking at him, and Jerry said, "Boy, they're not looking at me too good." And this big old burly nurse said, "Jerry, are you allergic to anything?" And Jerry said, "Yes, bullets." And as Jerry was being wheeled in to be operated on, and it was a long surgery, but he looked up at him and he said, I want you to operate on me as if I'm living, not as if I'm going to die. You know, Jerry survived, Jerry recovered, and someone else was talking to Jerry later, and he said, man, how in the world could you do that? And he said, you know, this is the choice that we have. You know, we have a choice to live or to die. We make choices in our life every day that are life-saving decisions that we make. So sometimes, I'm sure Jerry didn't always feel so good, but he chose that attitude, and it helped to save his life. Why do we do the things that we do? Let's talk about cultivating godly attitudes. With peer pressure and family influences and genetics and self-interest, they're all factors in why we do what we do. There's one overriding factor. We have the free right to choose what we will be. We have free will. Let's consider 3 examples in the Bible of 2 men and a woman who chose to go against the grain of their family and their cultural influences. We remember Joseph. So neither parental favoritism, nor sibling rejection, nor political power, neither threat or lust could shake him from the due regard for God. His attitude was one of trust and respect for God. Genesis 39:9, he is not greater in this house than I am, nor has he kept back anything from me except you, because you are his wife. How then can I do this great wickedness and sin against God? What about Moses? Moses didn't succumb to the trappings of the Egyptian religion, power, and privilege. He chose to identify himself with the people of God and suffer whatever came with it. Hebrews 11:25, choosing rather to be mistreated with the people of God than to enjoy the fleeting pleasures of sin. Then we have the example of Rahab. Now, this woman was thoroughly steeped in the Gentile religion and culture, yet she realized something about the threatening nation that was coming her way. Its God was different from the idols. She had heard the stories. So thus in faith, we read about in Hebrews 11:31, Rahab abandoned idolatry and put her trust in Jehovah. So what really matters? What really matters in this life is learning what God would have us to be and then abandoning everything contrary to that model, which requires an inward change. 2 Corinthians 3, verse 18, and we all, with unveiled face, beholding the glory of the Lord, are being transformed into the same image with one degree of glory to another, for this comes from the Lord, who is the Spirit. So what then is our attitude toward the world around us? You know, we're daily confronted with choices from friends, from enemies, from family to material things, sinful opportunities, work, school, recreation, time. Is there anything in your life that you would like to change? Are there any attitudes that need to be changed or improved? Why do we choose? Why do we choose it? Are we choosing that which would please God? So some of you may say, I score 100% on my Christian attitudes. And some of you, I would probably say you probably do score 100% because you're striving for perfection, and we all should, right? But how do you sustain that 100%? What are some keys? Let's talk about it as we wrap up. What are some keys to sustaining a Christian attitude. I'm reminded of a song that we sang just last Sunday night whenever Case Tolbert was baptized. Have thine own way, Lord, have thine own way. We need to yield ourselves totally to the Lord's will. In other words, your outward life must reflect your inner self. Another song that I'm reminded of, we have a lot of great songs that help us in shaping and sustaining our Christian attitudes, is the one that starts out with all of self and none of thee. And then the last verse is none of self and all of thee. Certainly we as Christians should be in prayer. One of our classes later in this quarter will be on prayer. We need to pray against a strong defense against Satan. We need to study, as we're doing here tonight, study about helping us make the right choices to maintain a good Christian attitude and digest the Scriptures. We should become busy in the Lord's work if we're not already. Many of you are very busy, very involved. Many of us maybe would like to get more involved in certain areas, and I'm sure that our elders and deacons and leaders of this church would love for us to be busy in evangelizing, visiting people, encouraging others, more missionary work. We mentioned earlier about the fellowship and what a joy and a way that is to help encourage us and to help build each other up. And a song that I want us to sing as our closing song in just a moment is How Sweet, How Heavenly is the Sight. If you want to go ahead and turn to number 639, that'll be our closing song. And then finally, we don't think about this very often. Has anyone ever smiled at you that you didn't smile back at them? Or have you ever smiled at somebody that, they didn't smile back at you? It's something that we don't think about, but you're walking down the street and this person has this long look on their face, and all of a sudden you give them a smile and look them right in the eye. What are they going to do? More than likely they're going to smile back, right? Right, Tony? Tony's always smiling back there. You ever see Tony not smiling? It's infectious. I'm reminded of a book that I read as a little boy. Maybe you remember this book too. The Smile That Traveled Around the World. Anyone remember that book? Maybe some of you aren't old enough yet. I don't know. But there was a story about a boy that went on a boat and he smiled at somebody. And then someone got off that boat and they went to India and they went to South Africa and they went to different places in the different continents. Got on a plane and flew across, a different continent. And someone smiled at somebody. Someone smiled at somebody else. And that smile went all the way around the world. And certainly it's something that's simple. When you smile yourself, is it hard to have a bad attitude when you're smiling, if it's sincere? And sometimes if we act enthusiastic and we smile, certainly adds to our face value, right? So let me encourage you to keep on smiling. So in conclusion, why do we do the things we do? Because we have choices to make. So let's make sure that our choices reflect the Christian attitude. And that's what we're going to be talking about. This next Wednesday night, Roger McDonald will be teaching the class. I believe he's going to be sharing some ideas about our Christian faith. Certainly, I look forward to that. I'll be live streaming it, Lord willing, next Wednesday night. But let's have a prayer, and then let's close with the singing of number 639, which is How Sweet, How Heavenly.